The nation's new leader was not in the executive mansion. He was, instead, living in a suite at the New Willard Hotel, biding his time as the widow of his predecessor, Mrs. Harding, prepared to move her belongings from the White House. It was August 23, 1923, only 3 weeks since Calvin Coolidge had become the 30th President of the United States. The city of Washington, D.C. was humid and quiet. Inside the hotel suite, the president awoke. The room was dark, but he was not alone. A figure was moving silently, sifting through the president's own clothes, which were draped over a chair. The intruder had not come through the guarded hallway door. He had climbed through the window. Coolidge, exhibiting the unnerving calm that would come to define him, remained still. He watched as the young man located his wallet and his watch. The intruder's hand then closed around a small gold charm. At this, the president finally spoke. His voice was not a shout of alarm, but a quiet, firm statement. "I wish you wouldn't take that." The figure froze, startled by the voice from the bed. Coolidge was referring not to the wallet full of money or the valuable watch, but specifically to the charm. He instructed the confused young man to read the inscription on the piece. The intruder, holding it up to the dim light from the window, read the words, "Presented to Calvin Coolidge, Speaker of the House, by the Massachusetts General Court." A dawning, horrified realization spread across the young man's face as he looked from the charm to the quiet figure in the bed. "Are you President Coolidge?" he asked. Coolidge confirmed that he was. Then, in a move that illustrates his unique character more than any policy decision, he pivoted the entire situation. "If you want money, let's talk this over." The president, in his sleeping attire, began a calm negotiation with the man who had just tried to rob him. The intruder, it turned out, was a student. He and his schoolmate were stranded in the city, he explained, and they needed money for a train fare to get back to college. The amount they needed was specific, $32. Coolidge assessed the young man. This situation, which for any other person would be a moment of terror, had transformed in Coolidge's mind into a problem to be solved with maximum efficiency. He reached for the wallet the student had just put down, opened it, and counted out $32. He handed the money to the intruder, but he defined the transaction with the precision of a lifelong lawyer. He was giving it as a loan. This single word was a profound and instantaneous solution. It was not just an act of kindness. It was a complex, legalistic de-escalation. By defining the money as a loan, Coolidge was ensuring the young man would not have obtained the money by theft. He had, in that instant, transformed a criminal act into a civil matter, preserving the student's future while simultaneously preventing a chaotic and deeply embarrassing security incident for his new administration. It was the quietest, most pragmatic solution possible. He then gave the student one last piece of advice. The Secret Service agents were stationed in the hall. To be caught by them would create a noisy, bureaucratic problem that Coolidge, above all else, disdained. The president advised the student to leave as unconventionally as he had entered. The young man, $32 in hand, turned back to the open window. That quiet, pragmatic man had been shaped by childhood in the hills of New England. The man in the hotel room was John Calvin Coolidge, born in Plymouth Notch, Vermont, on July 4, 1872. He remains the only U.S. president to be born on Independence Day. His upbringing was the very definition of rural New England life. He was the son of a village storekeeper and farmer, John Calvin Coolidge, Sr., a man who held a variety of local offices, from tax collector to peace officer. Young Calvin grew up helping on the family farm, tending accounts, and selling apples. The values of this environment, frugality, hard work, and a profound commitment to public service, were imbued in him from his first breath. His famous taciturn nature was not an affectation. It was forged by this landscape and hardened by personal loss. His mother, Victoria, passed away when he was just 12. "The greatest grief that can come to a boy came to me," he wrote later. Life was never to seem the same again. When he was 17, his beloved younger sister, Abigail, also died. These events contributed to the stoical personality that would define his public life. This reserved nature became a national fascination, earning him the nickname Silent Cal. Stories of his sparse speech were legendary. The most famous, recounted in various forms, involves a woman seated next to him at a social event. She told him, "I have made a bet that I could get more than 2 words out of you." Coolidge, without missing a beat, replied, "You lose." He was fully aware of this reputation and cultivated it with his own dry maxims. "If you don't say anything, you won't be called on to repeat it," he once said. And again, "I have never been hurt by what I have not said." However, the Silent Cal nickname was a half-truth. His silence was not an absence of thought, but a deliberate tool. It was an active, not a passive, quality. As vice president, he attended all cabinet meetings but never opened his mouth unless asked a direct question. But all the while, he was listening, absorbing every detail. This supposed silent man held 529 press conferences, more than any of his predecessors. He was not unwilling to speak. He was simply unwilling to waste words. This verbal frugality was a powerful symbol. He took office at a time when his great task was to restore the dignity and prestige of the presidency after a period of perceived extravagance and waste. The public needed a quiet, stoic, frugal man. Coolidge sensed this and leaned into the persona. He once told the actress Ethel Barrymore, "I think the American people want a solemn ass as a president, and I think I will go along with them." This dry quip revealed a deep, witty self-awareness. Behind the myth, there was a man of superb self-confidence. When a painter asked him what his very first thought was upon learning he had suddenly become president, Coolidge simply replied, "I thought I could swing it." This was the man his future wife, Grace Anna Goodhue, saw. A vivacious teacher at the Clark School for the Deaf, she was his polar opposite. Their first encounter was, according to legend, highly unusual. Grace was watering flowers when she glanced across the street and saw Coolidge through his boarding house window, shaving, while wearing nothing more than long underwear and a hat. Her spontaneous, loud laugh caught his attention. He later remarked to a friend with his typical wit, "Having taught the deaf to hear, Miss Goodhue might cause the mute to speak." Her friends were stunned at the union. But Grace saw the man behind the facade, incorruptible and straightforward, but also eccentric and funny, with a dry wit and mischievous streak. This combination of old-fashioned simplicity and quiet confidence was never more on display than the night he became president. In August 1923, Vice President Calvin Coolidge was on his annual vacation, staying at his family's homestead in Plymouth Notch, Vermont. This was his summer White House, though it bore no resemblance to the official residence in Washington. The Coolidge homestead was a modest house hidden away among the Green Mountains. Critically, in 1923, the home did not have electricity or a telephone. The entire village was cut off from the modern world. The only telephone in town was at Silly's store, just down the road. On the night of August 2, 1923, the nation's affairs were centered in San Francisco, where President Warren G. Harding lay gravely ill. That evening, he died. The government was, in that moment, leaderless. A terse message was dispatched to the vice president. The telegram reached the Western Union office at White River Junction, and from there, messengers were sent by automobile to find the remote homestead in Plymouth Notch. At 2:30 a.m. on August 3rd, Coolidge was awakened. He later described the moment vividly. "I was awakened by my father coming up the stairs, calling my name. I noticed that his voice trembled. His father, John Calvin Coolidge Sr., handed him the official report. President Harding was gone, and he was now the president." A small group gathered in the family parlor, a room now known as the Oath of Office Room. It included his wife Grace, Representative Porter H. Dale, who had rushed to the homestead, and a few others. It was determined that Coolidge must take the oath immediately to ensure the continuity of government. But there was a problem. In this remote, dark house, who could possibly administer the presidential oath? The solution was standing in the room. His father, John Calvin Coolidge Sr., was a Vermont notary public and a justice of the peace. He was legally empowered to swear in his own son. The scene that followed is one of the most iconic in American history. There were no bright lights, no grand halls. By the light of a kerosene lamp, with its flickering, oily glow, the elder Coolidge administered the oath of office. Calvin Coolidge placed his hand on the family Bible. The time was 2:47 a.m. As one account later described, a venerable father had sworn his son, chief executive of the greatest nation of the world. This moment was more than a historical curiosity. It was a powerful symbolic realignment of the presidency. After an administration associated with modernity and scandal, this image was the perfect antidote. The lack of electricity, the homespun democracy of the setting, the profound simplicity of a father administering the oath to his son, it was a visual and spiritual return to the nation's origins. It was the very embodiment of the dignity and prestige that Coolidge was tasked with restoring. And what did the new president do after this most significant moment of his life? He displayed his trademark cool. He spoke briefly with the few reporters who had assembled. Then, President Coolidge went back to bed. This act is often portrayed as comically stoic, but it was the ultimate expression of his "I thought I could swing it" mentality. This was a man of superb self-confidence. Going back to bed was not an act of indifference. It was the act of a man who saw the presidency not as a terrifying burden, but as the next logical task. The oath was administered. The task for that night was complete. The next task was to get a few hours of sleep before beginning the work of the presidency. The man who went back to bed was the same man who, 3 years later, would be confronted with a very unusual Thanksgiving dilemma. The narrative moves forward to November 1926. The scene is the White House, buzzing with preparations for the annual Thanksgiving meal. For years, a tradition had existed in America for farmers and supporters to send animals for Thanksgiving dinner to the president. Since the passing of Horace Vose, the traditional provider of the White House Thanksgiving turkey in 1913, these gifts had become a common, if somewhat disorganized, occurrence. Among the many items and crates arriving at the executive kitchen that year was a package from a supporter, Vinnie Joyce of Nitta, Yuma, Mississippi. The staff who opened it found not a turkey, but a live, plump raccoon. A note was attached suggesting the animal be served for the 1926 Thanksgiving dinner. It is essential to understand that, at the time, this was not a joke or a strange gift. In the 1920s, eating raccoon was common. As Atlas Obscura reports, Native Americans and early American settlers had long relied on small game like raccoons to supplement their diets. In the American South, it was a well-established staple, and the meat was prevalent enough that Mark Twain, while traveling in Europe, famously included raccoon on a list of American foods he missed. By the 1920s, it was sold in city game markets and featured on the menus of many urban restaurants. The Washington Evening Star, reporting on the gift, matter-of-factly described the taste as a combination of chicken and suckling pig. The raccoon had arrived as food. The problem was that this particular raccoon had been sent to this particular president. Calvin Coolidge had never eaten raccoon and had no appetite to try it. More importantly, the First Family and especially First Lady Grace Coolidge were well-known animal lovers. They looked at the small masked creature, and they did not want to eat her. The decision was made. The raccoon would not go to the kitchen. The family decided to make it a pet instead. This event marks a subtle but significant cultural shift, with the White House at its center. The press reaction confirmed the uniqueness of the Coolidge's decision. The Evening Star noted that the oddest aspect of the entire story was not the raccoon arriving as food, but the first family's unusual decision to let the critter live. By sparing the animal, the Coolidges were making a public, if unintentional, statement, helping to elevate the animal in the public's mind from game to companion. It was also a perfect brand fit for the first family. The story of the stoic president sparing a small animal from the Thanksgiving table was a story of profound human interest. It reinforced the positive, non-political image of the Coolidges, showing the soft heart beneath the silent Cal exterior. For the White House press corps, it was a gift. The public obsessed over the story. The raccoon was promptly named Rebecca. She was brought into the White House, not as an entree, but as a new and celebrated member of the first family's growing menagerie. Rebecca's pardon was just the beginning of her story. Her residency at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue would become a national sensation. Rebecca's transition from dinner to pet was immediate and total. She became a fixture at 1600 Pennsylvania Ave. That very Christmas, President Coolidge gave her an embroidered collar. It was inscribed with her official title, which the press had already given her: White House Raccoon. A special wooden house was constructed for her in a large tree on the White House grounds, complete with a wire fence for safety and a panel that flipped up so she could climb in and out easily. Like most raccoons, Rebecca was not a quiet tenant. She was given the liberty of the house, and she used it. First Lady Grace Coolidge, in her writings, described Rebecca as a mischievous, inquisitive party. She was a known escape artist, and her indoor activities were a constant source of chaos for the White House staff. Her adventures, as chronicled by the First Lady and the press, included knocking over plants, unscrewing light bulbs, opening cabinets, and unpotting houseplants. Her absolute favorite activity, however, was in the bathroom. The staff found she enjoyed nothing better than being placed in a bathtub with a little water in it and given a cake of soap with which to play. While the public saw Silent Cal, Rebecca and the other White House pets saw a different man. Coolidge, who was described as having very few human friends and being uncomfortable interacting with his own species, doted on his pets, and considered them his closest friends. Rebecca was, by many accounts, a favorite pet. The president visited her every day. He would let her nestle in Coolidge's lap when he sat by the fireplace. This story provides the clearest, most authentic window into Calvin Coolidge's hidden emotional life. He was not a cold man, but rather a selective one, and he found a non-judgmental, non-verbal companionship with animals that he often struggled to find with people. A powerful anecdote illustrates this bond. When the White House was being repaired, the first family had to move to a temporary mansion in DuPont Circle. The president, settling in, worried that Rebecca might get lonely back at the White House. He promptly sent a limousine to bring her from the White House to stay with them. Rebecca became a national celebrity. First Lady Grace Coolidge cuddled the pet and was often photographed holding her. She would take Rebecca for walks on a leash on the White House grounds. Rebecca made a star appearance at the 1927 White House Easter egg roll, where she was a bigger attraction than many of the human guests. She was a true member of the family, even going on their summer vacations. In 1927, when the Coolidges took an 1-800-mile railroad journey to the Black Hills for their summer White House, Rebecca went with them in a basket, alongside the family dogs, Rob Roy and Prudence Prim, and 5 canaries. An attempt was made to find her a mate. A White House policeman captured a male raccoon, which the president named Reuben. The matchmaking failed spectacularly. Reuben didn't like Rebecca and did not take to the domestic life. Grace Coolidge wrote about the incident, explaining that Rebecca, having had her own way so long, was a little overbearing and dictatorial, and clearly preferred the bliss of a single life. Reuben, for his part, escaped and disappeared without a trace. When the Coolidges prepared to leave the White House in 1929, they knew Rebecca was too domesticated to be released. They donated Rebecca to the zoological quarters at the Rock Creek Zoo, which is now the National Zoo. She did not adapt well to the new life and passed away shortly after. Rebecca was perhaps the most famous, but she was far from the only animal in the Coolidge's orbit, and the story of the president's loan had a quiet, fitting conclusion. This history begins by resolving the suspenseful matter from that night in the New Willard Hotel. What became of the student who was given a $32 loan by the President of the United States after breaking into his room? The story, which was kept from public knowledge for many years, has a simple, satisfying ending that validates the president's unorthodox decision. Calvin Coolidge's judgment of character was proven correct. The young man later paid back the amount in full. This quiet, profound integrity was the public face of a man who, in private, enjoyed a mischievous streak and a fun-loving side. The public saw a stoic, but the White House staff knew about his mechanical horse. To save time on exercise, he had an electric horse installed in the White House. It was a contraption designed by the health innovator John Harvey Kellogg. Coolidge rode it 3 times a day, sometimes pretending he was a cowboy. The machine had 2 variable gaits, trot and gallop. This peculiar hobby was kept secret until the day the machine went berserk and bucked him from the saddle, forcing the embarrassed president to send for an electrician to repair his bucking steed. Rebecca the Raccoon was not an anomaly. She was simply the most famous member of a vast White House menagerie. The Coolidges were so well known for their devotion to animals that people all over the world shipped animals to them. The collection included numerous dogs, such as the white collies Rob Roy and Prudence Prim, and a Shetland sheepdog named Calamity Jane. There were cats named Tiger, Blackie, and Timmy, and then there were the exotic gifts: a wallaby, a baby black bear, a bobcat named Smokey, and an antelope. The most humorously named pets were a pair of twin lion cubs, a gift from the mayor of Johannesburg, South Africa. Coolidge, in a perfect display of his dry wit and his governing philosophy, named them Tax Reduction and Budget Bureau. This was not just a joke, it was a daily, practical lesson. An author later noted that what Coolidge liked about the lion cubs was that they were the same weight. He insisted on feeding them even Steven, making sure there would not be one big, fat cat and one runt. He used his pets to communicate his most deeply held beliefs in a way that was completely disarming. Perhaps the largest gift of all was Billy, a pygmy hippopotamus given to the president by the industrialist Harvey Firestone in 1927. Billy was reported to be 6 feet long and weigh 600 pounds. Coolidge, a practical man, knew this animal could not live on the White House lawn and immediately donated him to the National Zoo. Billy became one of the zoo's most popular attractions, described by the New York Times as frisky as a dog. He also became one of the most important animals in the history of American zoos, becoming the common ancestor to most pygmy hippos in American zoos by siring 23 calves. The final story connects back to Rebecca. After she was moved to the zoo and the Coolidges left the White House in 1929, the Hoovers moved in. Shortly after, a new creature wandered onto the White House grounds and moved into Rebecca's vacant treehouse. A White House policeman, B.B. Snodgrass, captured the animal. It was a wild opossum. The Hoovers, taking a cue from the Coolidges, adopted the animal, placed him in the pen built for Rebecca, and named him Billy Possum.